This is a review of Starfinder Angels of the Drift number 5 from Dynamite Comics. It is written by James L. Sutter, art by Menna, colors by Adriano Augusto, letters by Tom Napolitano, and cover art by, I'm sorry if I'm going to say this incorrectly, Biagio D'Alessandro. That's for cover A, which is the main cover. I hope I got that right, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so this is the finale of the miniseries for the tabletop role playing game inspired story about Navasi and her crew on a quest to deliver the signal to a isolated planet where the planet is segregated into two cultures, and that segregation is created by a literal force field that keeps them apart. One is a lower class, one is an upper class, and you get the feeling James L. Sutter is trying to make a statement there about separating peoples by class in within the same culture when they both have everything to gain from working together. But uh, probably best not to dig into that too much. So, where do we leave off with Navasi and her crew? They were being hunted by these different factions of people because they were seen as interlopers, and they were caught in the middle of a war between these two classes. And they decided that the best way that they could go about getting to the command center is to use the biggest weapon they could find, which is this gaggle of giant space worms that fly around the upper atmosphere of the planet named Kevgon, I believe is the name of the planet. And so where we left off is they were going to hitch a ride, Dune style, on these giant flying space worms and see if they can create a little bit of havoc to create a distraction, separate the armies, and then also bust into the command center to deliver the signal, which, when delivered, gives everybody the plans for drift engines, which would give that planet and all the different warring factions the technology plans that they needed to be able to overcome their isolation and be the masters of their own destiny, whether they like it or not. So, how was it? How was the issue? Well, overall, not bad. I mean, if you're going to go out with a bang for a miniseries, James L. Sutter pretty much does the trick. You get big space battles, flying giant worms, all kinds of telepathy, technology, people using big axes and spears and all kinds of mystical weapons. Then you also have people using big laser cannons, big laser weapons, and all kinds of action adventure type of excitement that you would expect from a series that's going out in grand style with as much of a climactic ending or finish as you can imagine. So the Navasi and her crew, they get on the worms, they break into the command center and they deliver the signal. But that battle isn't over yet. Just because they got the message out there doesn't mean that their story ends. And I'm not going to spoil the ending too much, but there's definitely more fighting that needs to occur before all is said and done. So overall, not bad. It's a great way to end the series. People who are into sci-fi and really with very deep, rich lore, folks who like things like Dune, folks who like things like the more complex science fiction stories, you get a lot. There's a lot to like here. Uh, Regarding the art from Menna and Adriano Augusto, as you can see from some, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see some of the sample pages up on the screen. If you're reading the review, you're going to see some of the sample pages in the review. Lots of detail, lots of intricacy with the inks and the pencils and the coloring. It's almost too much in some panels because there's a lot happening here. So you got to give Edu Menu credit for getting all the detail and the depth of the character designs and the big monster designs and the battles and the explosions and the fires. And there's just so much happening in this comic. But that's exactly the where you got to have to give Menu credit for kind of pulling it all off and trying to cram as much detail for the action and the big battles that are happening as possible into the very confined space of each individual panel. So what do we like about the comic? Well, because it is a lot. It's almost too much. Now, if you're a fan of the tabletop RPG and you like this type of quest type, or I should say it's more like a raid or a big quest type of action that you would expect from a tabletop RPG. This kind of fits right in. Maybe you're not used to seeing it presented visually, but you get all the characters and the lore and the history and all this stuff that's happening all at once. The the negative side of that is if you're not in a tabletop RPG player and you're not familiar with the game and you're not familiar with these characters and the lore, it's overwhelming. It's almost too much. So you feel like you have to kind of go back several issues and take notes to go to get all the way up to this point, figure out who's who, what's what. It's definitely not a comic that you go in cold and read lightly. You sort of have to pay really deep attention to everything that's going on so you can kind of keep track of what's happening. So James L. Sutter did his plus and his minus because he gave you what you would expect from an adaptation of a role-playing game, but at the same time, if you're not a fan of the RPG and you just want a straightforward sci-fi comic, it's almost too much. So having said that, what do we think overall? Great action, great pacing, big things are happening. This feels like a big epic story. At the same time, it's almost too much because you've got so many characters and so many races and different pieces of lore that you have to piece together that it becomes overwhelming if you're not taking notes. So on that point, we're going to give this comic, Starfinder Angels of the Drift number 5, a solid 7.5 out of 10.